Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. We're going to begin with a reference to Genesis 9, 5, and 6, and then we're going to study Exodus chapter 21, verses 28 through 36, with cross references in Zechariah and Jeremiah and the Gospel of Matthew. Here is Genesis 9, 5 through 6 for context. And I will require a penalty for your lifeblood. I will require it from any animal and from any human. If someone murders a fellow human, I will require that person's life. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans, his blood will be shed, for God made humans in his image. This is the case within theonomy for capital punishment, just basing laws on the Old Testament law of God. Now, what the critical breakdown within theonomy is that we're not a theocracy and we're not Old Testament Israel, but I can still see how you're basing your laws off the ultimate source, God. This was God's law. So God had declared this all the way back in the book of Genesis, that there would be a penalty not only from a human, but also from any animal. Anytime an animal kills a human, even to this day in America, it's put to death, regardless of how precious its species may be to my fellow animal lovers. Here's Exodus 21, verse 28. Now God's going to institute what he said he would do in Genesis 9. He's going to codify it in the laws of Israel. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox must be stoned. This, by the way, is a rare way to put an animal to death. And its meat may not be eaten, but the ox's owner is innocent. However, look at this. This is phenomenal. Like, it shows a sense of liability in law that predates American laws by a long shot. However, if the ox was in the habit of goring and its owner has been warned yet does not restrain it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox must be stoned and its owner must also be put to death. Wow. So this is, first of all, there's a proviso coming where in verse 30, the man can also pay a ransom instead of being put to death for the actions of his own stupid animal. Even though he knew better, he knew this animal had the habit of doing that and he did nothing to restrain it. Still, there's a means whereby he can atone with his life. It's verse 30. If instead a ransom is demanded of him, he can pay a redemption price for his life in the full amount demanded from him. All right. I grew up with horses. We were members of the B-Bar-K Club, and my sister competed in National High School Rodeo Association rodeos across the South. And, we grew up learning how to rope, and my sister competed in like barrel racing and pole bending, and we'd go on trail rides and camp out at cold water horse trails and ride our horses through rivers and all that stuff and go on trail rides. My favorite part of that memory growing up with horses was taking whatever the rodeo horse was or the fastest horse we had and then just like aiming him diagonally across the front pasture and just letting him run as fast as he could. I just loved it. It was great. It was really fun. But for the most part, horses were kind of an expensive hassle. That's why I don't have horses today. I enjoyed it when I was a little kid, but then I caught the football bug and I played baseball and soccer and football and really liked football and then started drumming. And that was that. So horses were long gone in my love that I had from as kids. They also present not only a huge cost, but also you're liable for their actions. Every once in a while growing up, we would, just a handful of times, I think maybe 2 or 3 times in my childhood did this ever happen where all the Campbells were on high alert because the horses got out. I think on one occasion, something had happened to one of the fence posts and they managed to get out of the fence. In another case, something happened to the gate latch and it was faulty and then the horses got out that way. But we never let them roam free. And it's because as a little child, I remember having the fear of the litigious world put into me because I understood if the horses get out and someone is speeding down Beulah Road and they hit our horse and they die, we would be sued into oblivion because of it. Now, that is accidental, and it's arguably not the fault of the horse owner unless the owners of the horse would be aware of this tendency of the animal to do this. In this regard, the Old Testament law, I believe, is more fair than the American law on this. Because to my knowledge, I have not looked up the laws for this in Washington State because I don't own horses anymore. I don't have to wake up earlier, stay up late to feed the dumb animals. But I think that this law is actually better than the American law that I grew up in our constant fear of making sure that the gate was latched and that the fence was mended wherever it fell. Because we were liable even if we had horses that weren't in the habit of doing that stuff. Now, he's able to make atonement for himself, and it gets a little more controversial in the next verses, and then I'll show you why. If it gores a son or a daughter, this is verse 31, he's to be dealt with according to this same law. If the ox gores a male or female slave, he must give 30 shekels of silver to the slave's master, and the ox must be stoned. Ooh, all right. This is a favorite passage of critics of the Bible because I look at that. Those were chattel slaves. They skip the opening chapters of Exodus, wherein these slaves served, 6-year terms and were free on the 7th year. And they skip all of the other stipulations where there's legal penalty for the mistreatment of slaves, for example. And they go straight to this to say, like, look at that. These slaves were literally worth less than the sons or daughters of the animal owners, for crying out loud. So, or they were worth less than free people. So what's the deal, Jesse? All right, now there's a reason for this. We're going to come to it. Look at verse 33. When a man uncovers a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit must give compensation and must pay to its owner, but the dead animal will become his. When a man's ox injures his neighbor's ox and it dies, they must sell the live ox and divide its proceeds. They must also divide the dead animal. If, however, it is known that the ox was in the habit of goring, yet its owner has not restrained it, he must compensate fully. Ox for ox, the dead animal will become his. So it's fair treatment when it comes to like animal issues. And I want to come back to this differentiation between the penalty for your ox goring someone who is a free member of the nation of Israel, and then someone who is serving as a slave in Israel, where it's 30 pieces of silver to compensate for the life of a slave. Let's go to Jeremiah real quick. And Jeremiah is in a real estate transaction. Verse 8 of Jeremiah 32 reads, Then, as the Lord had said, my cousin Hanamel came to the guard's courtyard and urged me, Please buy my field in Anathoth in the land of Benjamin, for you own the right of inheritance and redemption. Buy it for yourself. Then I knew this was the word of the Lord. So I bought the field in Anathoth for my cousin Hanamel and weighed out the silver to him, 17 shekels of silver. Wow, Jesse, this piece of land is worth more than a human being. What's the deal with that? Well, see our series Love Story, the Book of Ruth, for more on what's happening in terms of this redemption. This is about people's pieces of the promised land, and that has heavenly implications. Take a look now at Zechariah chapter 11, verse 12. Then I said to them, If it seems right to you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them. So they weighed my wages, 30 pieces of silver. Throw it to the potter, the Lord said to me. This magnificent price I was valued by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw it into the house of the Lord to the potter. It's a remarkable exchange. To Zechariah, this is a magnificent price, and it's thrown into the house of the Lord. Now, as you'll see, there's more to this story than just the immediate events that it describes. It's prophetically significant. Now let's fast forward to the New Testament, Matthew 26. Then one of the 12 disciples of Jesus, the man called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, What are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you? This is Judas talking about Jesus, handing Jesus over. So they weighed out 30 pieces of silver for him. And from that time, he started looking for a good opportunity to betray him. This was the price paid to Judas to betray Jesus. Now, Matthew 27. Verses 3 through 10. You're going to see how this Matthew verse ties in what's prophesied in Zechariah and in Jeremiah. All right, this cost. Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that Jesus had been condemned, was full of remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. I have sinned by betraying innocent blood, he said. What's that to us? They said. See to it yourself. So he threw the silver into the temple and departed. Then he went and hanged himself. So you can see this act of throwing the silver into the temple. I believe this was portrayed dramatically in Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ. And he's full of remorse, which seems to suggest a glimmer of hope for Judas. But I got to be honest, it does not look good for Judas. In verse 6, the chief priest took the silver and said, "It's not permitted to put it into the temple treasury since it's blood money." So it was unlawful for them to pay it in the first place. And now they feel like they can't take it back. There's hypocrisy in this. They conferred together and bought the potter's field with it as a burial place for foreigners. Therefore, that field has been called Field of Blood to this day, because it was purchased for 30 shekels of silver. That's actually a large amount of money. Then what was spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. They took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him whose price was set by the Israelites, and they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord directed me. So here's another prophecy from Jeremiah that was fulfilled in Matthew. And this 30 pieces of silver price comes back and comes full circle. And you can see how this wasn't merely the price set to compensate the owner of a slave for the death of a slave. It was literally the price that was set for the very life of Jesus himself. Everything in Exodus is prophetic. And Jesus, the ultimate one who came to set the captives free by his own proclamation of the word of God, rightly so in the synagogue at the beginning of the Gospel of Mark. It's the price that was set for the perfect one. It's the price that was set for Jesus' own life. It was reiterated in the prophets Jeremiah and Zechariah, and it's fulfilled in Jesus and in Jesus alone. This passage is not only an example of a remarkable sense of jurisprudence over matters of liability regarding animal behavior. And it's not only a matter of a price, which evidently Bible-wide is a very high price to be paid if a slave dies, remembering that those slaves are only tenured for 6 years and they're free on the 7th. It's the price that was set for the life of Jesus himself. So God prescribed this price in Exodus, and it's what was paid to betray Jesus in the Gospels. Bible-wide, this 30 pieces of silver amount really points forward to freedom for sinners like you and me. It's the price that Judas was paid that he tried to give back. It was used to purchase a burial ground for foreigners by the Pharisees, who knew that it was blood money that they paid, by the way. That's the price that was set for Jesus in Matthew all the way back in Exodus. As difficult as this passage may be to accept, it is best interpreted, and I believe most accurately understood, as prophetic for the price that would be paid for the Son of God.